Welcome in. This ordinary-looking Lincoln penny hides details most collectors overlook, and today, we're taking a closer look at what makes certain examples truly collectible. Coin number 1, a small copper-colored cent can look almost ordinary until you turn it over and realize that its reverse is telling the story of Abraham Lincoln before he became the president Americans remember today. The 2009 Lincoln Bicentennial cent featuring the professional life design captures Lincoln during the Illinois years when he was building a career as a lawyer, politician, and public speaker, standing before the Illinois state capitol in Springfield. It was not simply another annual change to the penny. It was part of a four-design program created to commemorate both the 200th anniversary of Lincoln's birth and the 100th anniversary of the Lincoln cent itself. What makes this particular issue especially interesting to collectors is the enormous difference between an ordinary circulated example and a truly exceptional specimen. Later, we will look at authenticated auction results and the characteristics that can push a coin from everyday pocket change into serious numismatic territory. The key is understanding that the date alone does not create rarity. Instead, condition, color, strike quality, mint origin, variety, errors, authentication, and collector demand all work together to determine whether a professional life cent is merely a historical keepsake or a coin worthy of a premium collection. The story behind this reverse begins in 1830, when Abraham Lincoln's family moved from Indiana to Illinois, a place that would become central to his professional and political development. Lincoln worked a succession of jobs, studied law, entered politics, and eventually became a practicing attorney. In 1834, he was elected to the Illinois General Assembly, and in 1837 he moved to Springfield, where he developed his legal career and began establishing the reputation that would eventually carry him onto the national stage. He won election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1846, and later became nationally recognized through his 1858 debates with Stephen Douglas. Although Lincoln lost the Senate election associated with those debates, the exposure helped transform him from an Illinois politician into a figure with national political importance. 2 years later, the Republican Party nominated him for president, and he won the 1860 election. The professional life reverse deliberately freezes the story before the presidency, showing the younger Lincoln standing near the old Illinois state capitol in Springfield. The United States Mint released this third design into general circulation on August 13, 2009, making it the third of 4 different Lincoln reverses issued during the bicentennial year. The design was created by United States Mint Artistic Infusion Program master designer Joel Iskovitz, and sculpted by United States Mint sculptor engraver Don Everhart, while the obverse continued to use Victor David Brenner's familiar Lincoln portrait. The same basic portrait lineage introduced in 1909 technically. The ordinary circulating professional life cent is a modern Lincoln cent through and through. And one of the most important distinctions for collectors is its composition. Regular Philadelphia and Denver business strikes use a copper-plated zinc composition, weighing about 2.5 grams and measuring approximately 19 millimeters across, with a plain edge. The copper coating gives the coin its familiar reddish appearance when fresh, but the underlying zinc core becomes important when the plating is damaged, exposing the lighter-colored metal beneath. The obverse carries Liberty, In God We Trust, and the date 2009 around Brenner's portrait of Lincoln, while the reverse places Lincoln and the Illinois Capitol scene at the center, surrounded by United States of America, EPLURIBUSUNUM, and 1 cent. Philadelphia examples carry no mint mark, while Denver pieces bear a small d, and that distinction is important because the 2 regular strike issues have different recorded mintages. PCGS lists approximately 316 million Philadelphia professional life cents and 336 million Denver examples, meaning the design was produced in very large numbers. Those figures immediately explain why the typical circulated specimen is not inherently rare. Yet there is an important twist. The Mint also produced special uncirculated versions in the original Lincoln Cent alloy of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. Those special pieces are fundamentally different from the ordinary copper-plated zinc cents found in circulation and can be much more interesting to collectors who know exactly what they are looking at. That difference in production is where the question of value becomes much more complicated. A circulated Philadelphia or Denver professional life cent normally does not approach the four-figure territory associated with exceptional certified pieces because hundreds of millions were struck. Even a nice uncirculated example may trade for a relatively modest amount unless it possesses something that separates it from the enormous population of ordinary survivors. But the upper end tells a different story. PCGS records an auction result of $1,938.75 for a Philadelphia Professional Life Cent graded MS68RD, sold by Heritage Auctions on April 4, 2017. That number is important not because it means every 2009 Professional Life Cent is worth nearly $2,000, but because it demonstrates how dramatically condition can change the market for a modern coin. A hypothetical certified MS66 red specimen with attractive surfaces might command only a modest premium, while an unusually high-grade MS67 red could move into the hundreds depending on the marketplace and timing. A top-level MS68 red example, especially with strong eye appeal and excellent certification, can move toward the $1,700 to $2,000 range, with the documented auction record providing a real benchmark. PCGS currently lists hundreds of auction records for the professional life type, reinforcing the point that the market recognizes a major difference between ordinary pieces and elite certified survivors. The lesson is simple. Value is created by scarcity within a grade, not merely by the fact that a coin is from 2009. For collectors evaluating one of these cents, grading begins with preservation. Mint state means the coin has not entered normal circulation, but not every coin removed from a roll automatically deserves a high mint state grade. Contact marks, abrasions, carbon spots, fingerprints, weak details, and uneven coloration can all hold a specimen back. The red, or RD, designation is particularly important for copper-bearing coins because it indicates that the original reddish coloration has been substantially preserved under grading standards. A coin that has darkened naturally may fall into red-brown or brown classifications, and that can dramatically affect desirability when collectors are competing for the finest examples. Strike quality also matters. Collectors examine Lincoln's portrait, the lettering, the building and architectural details on the reverse, and the overall sharpness of the design to determine whether the coin was well struck. Surface preservation is equally critical because copper-plated zinc cents can develop visible marks from contact with other coins and can suffer plating problems. A coin that looks brilliant to the naked eye may reveal numerous distractions under magnification. Professional grading companies such as PCGS and NGC can encapsulate and authenticate a specimen, providing a standardized grade that makes high-value transactions easier to evaluate. The distinction between an attractive raw coin and a professionally certified top-grade coin is especially significant when the potential price rises into the hundreds or even beyond $1,000. For example, a genuinely exceptional certified piece might reach roughly $1,250 to $1,600 in a strong market, while a similar-looking raw coin could sell for dramatically less because the buyer is assuming the risk of grade and authenticity. Varieties and errors add another layer, but this is also where collectors need to be extremely careful. The 2009 Lincoln Bicentennial series became a fascinating field for variety specialists because the Mint produced 4 different reverse designs in a single year, creating an unusually concentrated collecting opportunity. There are documented double die and die variety discoveries within the broader 2009 series, but one of the most famous varieties, the dramatic extra finger, and related double die reverses, belongs to the Formative Years design rather than automatically applying to the professional life reverse. That distinction matters because online listings frequently use words such as error, rare, or double die without professional attribution. A genuine double die is created during the die-making process and produces recognizable, consistent doubling characteristics. Ordinary machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, plating issues, and damage after striking are different phenomena and usually do not carry the same premium. Collectors should therefore inspect unusual lettering, Lincoln's portrait, the building, and the surrounding inscriptions with magnification rather than assuming that any strange shape is an error. Major mint errors such as dramatic off-center strikes, wrong planchets, broad strikes, or significant die breaks can be collectible, but the value depends heavily on whether the anomaly is genuine and whether a recognized grading service will certify it. A convincing, authenticated error could potentially push a professional life sent toward $2,000 or more, but an internet asking price is not proof of market value. The strongest evidence comes from certified coins, recognized attribution, and documented auction results. Authentication becomes especially important when a supposedly ordinary cent is being offered for a surprisingly large amount. A collector should begin by verifying the date, mint mark, design, weight, diameter, and composition, then compare the coin with trusted reference images. A regular circulation strike should be consistent with the specifications of the issue, while a special uncirculated copper alloy version requires a different examination because its composition and production method are not the same as the circulating copper-plated zinc pieces. The coin should also be checked for altered mint marks, artificial color, chemical cleaning, tooling, polishing, added details, or other forms of manipulation. Cleaning can destroy the natural surface and reduce collector appeal even when the underlying coin is genuine. Storage is equally important. Avoid PVC-containing holders, excessive humidity, harsh chemicals, and unnecessary handling. Holding a coin by its edges and using inert archival quality holders or certified slabs helps protect the surfaces. For a raw specimen, a small flip designed for long-term coin storage is preferable to loose storage where the coin can rub against other metal objects. Collectors should also remember that a coin does not become rare simply because it has survived in brilliant condition. The real scarcity comes from the number of coins that survive at the highest grades, especially with strong red color, clean surfaces, sharp strikes, and no distracting defects. That is why one professional life cent might sell for only a few dollars, while another, appearing almost identical at first glance, could reach around $1,850 when certified at an exceptional grade and backed by a respected auction record. And that brings the professional life cent back to the larger story that makes it worth collecting in the first place. More than 650 million regular strike examples were produced across Philadelphia and Denver for this particular reverse design. So rarity cannot honestly be claimed for the ordinary issue simply because it carries the 2009 date. What makes the coin fascinating is the narrow path between abundance and true condition rarity. Millions can survive, but far fewer may survive with the combination of exceptional preservation, brilliant red color, superior strike, and a grade high enough to attract advanced collectors. The documented Philadelphia auction record near $1,939 shows how far that distinction can extend, while the much lower prices realized by proof and special finish versions demonstrate that every variation must be evaluated on its own terms. Ultimately, the professional life cent is valuable because it combines two kinds of history. On one side is the life of a young Illinois lawyer whose career was moving toward the national stage. On the other is a modern mint experiment that compressed a century of Lincoln cent history into a single commemorative year. The collector who finds one should not begin by assuming a fortune. The better approach is to identify the mint, Determine whether it is a regular strike, proof, or special uncirculated issue. Examine its color and surfaces. Search carefully for legitimate varieties or errors, and then consider professional certification if the coin appears exceptional. In a strong example, the difference between an ordinary cent and a remarkable numismatic specimen can be measured not by its face value, but by rarity within grade, documented provenance, and what informed collectors are willing to pay when a truly superior professional life cent appears at auction. Coin number 2, a coin that looks almost ordinary at first glance, carries one of the most personal chapters in Abraham Lincoln's story. A humble log cabin, a frontier childhood, and the beginning of a life that would eventually reshape the United States. The 2009 Lincoln Bicentennial cent, featuring the birth and early childhood in Kentucky design, was far more than a routine change to the nation's smallest denomination. It marked the 200th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, and at the same time, the 100th anniversary of the Lincoln cent itself, creating a one-year series in which 4 different reverse designs followed the major stages of Lincoln's life. The first of those designs entered circulation on February 12, 2009, exactly 2 centuries after Lincoln's birth, and its log cabin imagery immediately connected an everyday object to one of the most recognizable stories in American history. But the real intrigue begins when collectors stop looking at this coin simply as a commemorative penny and start examining what separates an ordinary survivor from an exceptional numismatic specimen. Later, the evidence from certified populations and documented auctions reveals just how dramatically grade, color, preservation, strike quality, originality, and scarcity at the highest levels can change the collector landscape. The important point is that the date itself does not make every example rare. Millions were produced, many remain available, and most circulated pieces are inexpensive. Yet within that enormous population is a much smaller group of pristine coins that collectors actively compete to own, and understanding why those survivors matter requires going back to the Kentucky frontier where Lincoln's story began. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a small log cabin near Nolin Creek in what is now Hodgenville, Kentucky. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were part of a frontier farming community, and young Abraham's earliest years were shaped by the practical demands of rural life. According to the United States Mint, the family moved to Knob Creek Farm when Abraham was about 2 years old, where the Lincolns worked a portion of a larger 228-acre farm. By the time the family left Kentucky in 1816, Abraham had already learned the basic responsibilities expected of a frontier child, including fetching water and gathering firewood. That history explains why the reverse of this cent does not show Lincoln as president, statesman, or national hero. Instead, it shows the humble cabin associated with the beginning of his life, emphasizing the extraordinary distance between his origins and his eventual place in American history. The design was created by United States Mint Artistic Infusion Program master designer Richard Masters and sculpted by United States Mint sculptor engraver Jim Licoretz. The reverse carries United States of America along the upper portion, 1 cent around the lower rim, EPLURIBUS UNUM beneath the cabin, and 1809 identifying the year of Lincoln's birth. The imagery is deliberately simple, and that simplicity is part of its power. A log structure represents a beginning, while the date connects the physical object to the precise moment when Lincoln entered the world. When the Mint launched the coin in Hodgenville on February 12, 2009, thousands of new pieces were distributed during a ceremony at LaRue County High School, making the first reverse of the Bicentennial program a particularly symbolic release. The coin's physical characteristics also tell an important story, because the 2009 Bicentennial cents were produced in more than one metallic form. The circulating version uses the familiar modern cent composition of 2.5% copper and the remainder zinc, while special uncirculated and proof versions were produced with the traditional pre-1982 Lincoln cent composition of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. The circulating cent weighs approximately 2.5 grams, measures about 19 millimeters in diameter, and has a plain, smooth edge. The obverse retained Victor David Brenner's Lincoln portrait, the same basic likeness introduced on the Lincoln cent in 1909, with "In God W.E. Trust" above the portrait, "Liberty" to the left, and 2009 to the right. The reverse was completely different from the Lincoln Memorial design collectors had known since 1959, and that change was historically significant because the mint described the four new reverses as the first redesign of the circulating Lincoln cent in half a century. Philadelphia and Denver produced circulating examples, with Philadelphia coins carrying no mint mark and Denver coins carrying a D. Numismatic Records list approximately 284.4 million Philadelphia examples and 350.4 million Denver examples for this first reverse, illustrating immediately why an ordinary circulated coin cannot honestly be called scarce simply because it belongs to the Bicentennial series. Production methods also matter when examining unusual specimens. A normal circulation strike was manufactured for everyday commerce, while the special collector versions were deliberately produced with different finishes and the historical copper alloy. That distinction means a collector should never judge a coin solely by its color or appearance. Weight, surface characteristics, finish, mint mark, and provenance all help determine exactly what kind of 2009 birth and early childhood cent is in front of you. That enormous mintage creates one of the most interesting contradictions in modern Lincoln cent collecting. The coin is common in general terms, but can become genuinely scarce at the highest levels of preservation. A circulated example may show scratches, discoloration, contact marks, flattened details, and the ordinary evidence of passing through countless hands. Such a coin generally has little premium beyond its interest as part of the four-piece bicentennial sequence. Even an attractive certified MS-65 red example is not automatically a four-figure coin. PCGS records a $6 auction sale for an MS-65 red example in 2014, illustrating how modest the market can be for lower mint state grades despite the coin's historical importance. The situation changes as the grade climbs because every additional level of preservation eliminates another portion of the surviving population. Collectors examine the portrait, lettering, cabin, fields, rims, and overall surfaces for marks and disturbances that may be invisible without magnification. Luster must remain original and lively rather than dull or chemically altered, and the red coloration becomes especially important because copper-bearing coins are classified according to their retained original color. A red, or RD, designation indicates a coin that has preserved the required degree of original red coloration under professional grading standards. At the upper end, even tiny imperfections can prevent a coin from reaching the next grade. This is why two coins pulled from the same roll can eventually occupy completely different positions in the market. One may remain a common modern cent, while another becomes a condition rarity. A superb certified specimen with exceptional color, clean fields, strong strike, and outstanding eye appeal can attract serious competition, and a hypothetical coin reaching the upper MS-67 range might bring hundreds rather than ordinary pocket change prices. The crucial distinction is that collectors are paying for the scarcity of that precise quality level, not simply for the 2009 date. The strongest evidence of that phenomenon comes from certified auction history. PCGS records a $4,800 sale for a 2009 birth and early childhood circulation strike graded MS-68 red, sold by Stack, Bowers in April 2025. The auction description identifies it as the single finest example of this circulation strike issue known to PCGS at the time of that sale, with a population of one and none higher. That result is extraordinarily important, but it must be interpreted correctly. It does not mean that every 2009 birth and early childhood scent is worth thousands of dollars, and it certainly does not mean that finding one with attractive red color guarantees a major windfall. The $4,800 result was achieved because the coin combined authentication, an elite MS68 RD grade, exceptional preservation, brilliant appearance, and extreme scarcity within that grade. PCGS's population information is the key to understanding the price. Collectors were not simply bidding on a penny. They were competing for an exceptionally rare position within a registry-quality population. The contrast is striking when placed beside lower-grade examples, including the MS65 result that sold for only a few dollars. This is how modern coin rarity often works. A coin can have hundreds of millions of pieces struck and still produce a tiny number of genuinely scarce high-grade survivors. A hypothetical MS67 RD with outstanding eye appeal might command several $100s or potentially move higher depending on the marketplace, while a verified MS68 RD can enter a completely different competitive arena. The authenticated record should therefore be treated as a benchmark for an exceptional coin, not as an average valuation. Current demand can shift, auction attendance can vary, and registry collectors may pay premiums that ordinary buyers would never consider. Varieties, errors, and authentication add another dimension, but this is an area where caution is essential. Because the 2009 Lincoln series attracted enormous attention, countless coins have been advertised online with claims of doubling, unusual lettering, strange surfaces, or supposed mint mistakes. Not every irregularity is a genuine mint error. Machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, plating damage, environmental corrosion, and post-mint alteration can all create appearances that are easily mistaken for collectible varieties. The birth and early childhood reverse itself should be examined carefully around the cabin, inscriptions, date 1809, rim, and designer initials. But collectors should not assume that an unusual-looking feature automatically represents a recognized double die. Genuine major errors can be valuable when they are dramatic, authentic, and professionally certified, but the value depends on the nature and severity of the error rather than on a seller's description. Authentication becomes particularly important when a coin appears capable of commanding a four-figure price. A serious examination should confirm the correct design, date, mint mark, dimensions, weight, composition, surface characteristics, and manufacturing consistency. Altered mint marks deserve special attention on Denver pieces, while artificial color can be a problem on coins being represented as brilliant red examples. Professional grading services can provide authentication, encapsulation, and a standardized grade, which becomes especially valuable when buyers and sellers are dealing with high-end specimens. If a coin appears dramatically better than typical examples, it should be photographed under neutral lighting, examined with appropriate magnification, compared against reliable references, and considered for professional certification before any major financial conclusion is reached. The strongest evidence is always an established attribution or certified example supported by documented sales, not an inflated online asking price. Preservation is equally important because the qualities that make a top-grade Lincoln cent valuable can be destroyed surprisingly easily. Copper-bearing surfaces respond to their environment, and fingerprints, moisture, abrasive cleaning, chemicals, improper holders, and repeated handling can permanently alter the appearance that collectors prize. A coin should be held by its edges rather than its faces, and valuable raw examples should be stored in inert, archival-quality holders that do not expose the surfaces to damaging materials. PVC-containing plastics should be avoided for long-term storage, and coins should be protected from excessive humidity and rapid environmental changes. Cleaning is especially dangerous because a shiny surface is not necessarily an original surface. A chemically cleaned cent may look bright, but lose the natural luster and texture that professional graders expect, often reducing its desirability substantially. For collectors assembling the complete 2009 Lincoln Bicentennial series, the birth and early childhood reverse also has special importance because it begins the chronological journey. Kentucky, then Indiana, Illinois, and finally Washington, D.C. The four designs were intentionally issued throughout 2009 at roughly 3-month intervals, and after the bicentennial program ended, the reverse changed to the Union Shield design representing Lincoln's efforts to preserve the nation as one united country. That makes the first reverse more than an isolated modern penny. It is the opening chapter of a deliberately constructed historical sequence. For long-term collectors, an original, sharply struck, beautifully preserved example can therefore have value beyond its immediate market price, because it represents an important transition in American coin design and commemorates a rare moment when the mint used a circulating denomination to tell a complete biographical story. In the end, the 2009 birth and early childhood Lincoln cent demonstrates why serious numismatics is not simply a hunt for old coins or coins with famous names. It is the study of differences that may appear insignificant until they are examined carefully. The ordinary Philadelphia and Denver issues were struck in enormous quantities, so most surviving circulated examples are not rare, and even many uncirculated coins remain readily obtainable. Yet the PCGS record of the MS-68RD specimen selling for $4.800 in 2025 proves that exceptional condition can create a completely different market tier when a coin reaches the finest known levels. That extraordinary result should never be generalized to every coin of the same date and design. A circulated piece might be worth little more than a nominal premium. A certified mid-mint state example can remain relatively inexpensive, and a superior high-grade specimen can become dramatically more desirable because collectors are competing for a scarce combination of grade, color, surfaces, strike, and eye appeal. The long-term appeal of this coin rests on that combination of measurable rarity and powerful history. On one side is Victor David Brenner's enduring portrait, connecting 2009 to the Lincoln cent, beginning in 1909. On the other is a simple Kentucky cabin representing a child whose life began far from the centers of political power. That contrast is precisely what makes the coin memorable. It reminds us that Lincoln's story did not begin in the White House or on the battlefield. It began with a family, a frontier community, and a small cabin in Kentucky. And 200 years later, that humble beginning was preserved on a coin that millions of Americans could hold in their hands. For collectors, the real challenge is learning to recognize when an ordinary survivor has become something much rarer. An authenticated, original, exceptionally preserved piece of Lincoln history, whose condition places it among the very best the mint's production of 2009 managed to leave behind. Coin number 3, there is something unusually revealing about the second reverse of the 2009 Lincoln Bicentennial cent. It shows Abraham Lincoln not as the president carved into national memory, but as a young man still working with his hands, sitting on a log with a book while an axe rests nearby. At first glance, it can look like just another modern penny, yet experienced collectors know that this particular design deserves a much closer examination. It was released as the second chapter in a 4-coin portrait of Lincoln's life, and because the mint produced enormous quantities, the real collecting story is not simply about finding the right date. It is about identifying the right issue, the right mint, the right surfaces, the right color, and sometimes an unusual die variety or error that separates one specimen from hundreds of millions of ordinary pieces. The Formative Years design commemorates Lincoln's life in Indiana from 1816 through 1830, when he was developing the habits of hard work and self-education that would later become part of his national legend. The United States Mint officially released the design on May 14, 2009. And as we examine the coin together, the mystery becomes more interesting. Why would collectors pay serious money for a penny struck only a few years ago, when so many examples still exist? Later, the documented auction record will give us a much clearer answer. But the important evidence is hidden in details most people never think to inspect: tiny marks, original luster, color preservation, strike quality, certification, and the surprisingly narrow population of coins that survive at the highest grades. To understand the reverse, we have to step into Indiana during the period that the mint wanted this coin to represent. In 1816, Abraham Lincoln's family moved from Kentucky to southern Indiana, where the future president spent much of his youth. The mint describes this period, from 1816 to 1830, as Lincoln's formative years, a time when he became a skilled plowman and woodcutter while also developing an intense interest in reading. Frontier life offered little formal schooling, but Lincoln's parents encouraged learning, and the young Abraham reportedly carried books with him even while working. The mint specifically notes several works associated with his reading, including The Life of Washington, Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, Robinson Crusoe, and 1001 Arabian Nights. The reverse artist, Charles Vickers, translated that idea into a compact scene. Lincoln is shown seated on a log, reading during a pause from his labor as a rail splitter, with his axe nearby. The symbolism is remarkably direct. The axe represents physical labor and the demanding frontier environment. The book represents curiosity, self-education, and intellectual ambition. Put those two elements together, and the coin becomes a visual argument about Lincoln himself, a young man developing both strength and knowledge. His years in Indiana were not without hardship. His mother, Nancy Lincoln, died when Abraham was 9, and his father later married Sarah Bush Johnston, who became an important influence in the family. Lincoln remained in Indiana until he was 21, when the family moved again. The 2009 coin therefore freezes a specific stage of his life, long before Springfield, the presidency, or the Civil War. It is the second reverse in a program created to commemorate the bicentennial of Lincoln's birth and the centennial of the original Lincoln cent, with 4 designs representing major stages of his life. Now turn the coin over and examine the construction rather than the story. The familiar obverse remained essentially the anchor of the entire program. Victor David Brenner's portrait of Lincoln, the same portrait lineage used on Lincoln cents since 1909. In God We Trust appears above the portrait, Liberty is positioned to the left, and 2009 appears to the right. On the reverse, Vickers's young Lincoln occupies the central composition, surrounded by United States of America, 1 cent, and EPLURIBUS UNUM. The ordinary circulating formative years cent is a copper-plated zinc coin weighing 2.5 grams and measuring 19 millimeters across, with a plain edge. Philadelphia produced the no-mint mark version, while Denver produced the demint mark version. PCGS records a mintage of 376 million for the Philadelphia issue, and 363.6 million for Denver, numbers large enough to immediately eliminate the idea that every formative years cent is intrinsically rare. The production process also created an important distinction for collectors, because the mint made special uncirculated versions using the traditional Lincoln cent alloy of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, rather than the copper-plated zinc composition used for ordinary circulating pieces. Those special strikes are heavier. PCGS lists the satin finish Philadelphia version at about 3.11 grams, compared with 2.5 grams for the regular circulation strike. That means a collector examining a supposedly unusual example should not rely on color alone. Weight, diameter, edge, surface texture, finish, and mint origin all help establish exactly what kind of coin is being examined. The mint mark is also more than a tiny letter. A missing mint mark on a Philadelphia piece is normal. A D on a Denver example identifies the production facility. When you are evaluating value, the first investigation should therefore begin with identification, not excitement. Confirm the design, date, mint mark, composition, and strike type before interpreting anything unusual. The economic setting of 2009 gives this little coin an unexpected backdrop. The United States was emerging from the severe financial crisis and recession that had dominated the previous year, with the housing collapse, credit turmoil, financial institution failures, and rising unemployment shaping everyday economic life. The cent itself, however, was still being produced for ordinary commerce, even as the mint simultaneously used it to commemorate one of the country's most important historical figures. That contrast is worth remembering. This was a modern circulating coin created during a difficult economic period, but its imagery deliberately looked backward to a much harsher frontier world. Once the formative years cents entered circulation, they could be found mixed with ordinary pocket change alongside older Lincoln cents, making condition the great dividing line for collectors. A coin that spent years in commerce quickly accumulated abrasions, contact marks, dirt, discoloration, and wear. On Lincoln cents, collectors pay close attention to the high points of the portrait on the obverse and to the raised elements of the reverse, while the fields reveal contact marks particularly well under magnification. But a coin does not have to circulate for damage to occur. Freshly struck cents can collide with other coins during production, transportation, bagging, or rolling, creating marks before a collector ever sees them. This is why mint state grading is so important. An MS-60 coin can be technically uncirculated, yet show numerous distracting marks, while higher grades require increasingly clean surfaces and stronger overall preservation. Color creates another layer. Copper-bearing Lincoln cents are generally described as brown, red-brown, or red, and the RD designation is especially important in the market for premium 2009 examples because original reddish coloration can greatly enhance eye appeal. Luster should also be examined carefully. Genuine original mint luster has a natural appearance that changes as the coin is tilted under light, while harsh cleaning or chemical treatment can leave a dull, unnatural, or overly bright surface. The experienced collector is not merely asking, "Does this penny look shiny?" The better question is, "Does the surface still look original?" That question becomes especially important when we reach the upper grades, because the surviving population tells a more interesting story than the original mintage. Hundreds of millions were struck, yet the number of coins surviving in extraordinary condition is far smaller. PCGS population information for the Philadelphia Formative Years issue shows how sharply the population narrows at the top. One PCGS set registry example, graded MS66RD, for instance, is listed with 87 pieces graded higher and 1,187 lower, illustrating how population data can change as the grade increases. The Denver issue provides another useful example. PCGS records a 2009 D MS67 RD example with 27 pieces higher and 1,758 lower in the cited population data. These numbers should never be treated as permanent counts because certified populations change whenever additional coins are submitted, crossover, or resubmitted, but they demonstrate the principle behind condition rarity. Now the value question becomes much clearer. PCGS records a $1,995 auction result for a Philadelphia Formative Years cent graded MS67, sold in August 2010, while Great Collections reports a later MS68 RD Philadelphia example, selling for $2,363.62. On the Denver side, a certified MS68 RD example sold for $1,320 at Stack's Bowers in April 2025, and PCGS recorded a $2,040 sale for a 2009 D MS69 RD at Heritage Auctions in May 2025. These are not ordinary prices for ordinary pennies. They are evidence of what happens when certification, grade, originality, color, eye appeal, and scarcity converge. A collector should therefore never see a $2,040 auction result and assume that a circulated 2009 Formative Years cent is worth anything remotely similar. The auction record belongs to a specific authenticated coin in a specific grade. That distinction is the foundation of responsible coin valuation. But there is another investigation waiting on the reverse: die varieties. The Formative Years issue has documented double die varieties cataloged by specialists, including FS801 and additional FS-numbered varieties. PCGS lists multiple Formative Years double die reverse entries, including FS801 and several other attributed varieties, demonstrating that the series is more complicated than simply Philadelphia versus Denver. The key word is attributed. A collector should not assume that every apparent doubling is a doubled die. Genuine doubled dies originate during die creation and produce characteristic secondary images that can be distinguished from mechanical or post-strike effects. Machine doubling may flatten or shift design elements without producing the same type of raised secondary design associated with a true doubled die. Scratches, plating disturbances, die deterioration, and damage after striking can also imitate unusual features. PCGS records a certified FS 801 red example graded MS66 that sold for $112 in 2021, showing that recognized varieties can carry premiums, but the recorded price is nowhere near the level achieved by the finest ordinary strike examples. That is an important warning against treating every error penny claim online as a treasure. Major mint errors can be collectible when they are genuine and dramatic, but a real error must be evaluated on its own characteristics and certified when the financial stakes justify it. A proper examination begins with the date and mint mark, then moves across the lettering, portrait, log, axe, Lincoln's figure, rim, and fields. Magnification can help identify promising features, but it cannot by itself authenticate a variety. When a coin appears unusual enough to command serious money, comparison with established references and professional attribution becomes much safer than relying on photographs from an online listing. The same principle applies to counterfeits and altered coins. Unusual color, manipulated mint marks, unnatural surfaces, incorrect weight, or inconsistent details should create questions rather than excitement. Preserving a promising specimen is the next part of the investigation, because the very qualities that create value can disappear through careless handling. Never scrub a Lincoln cent simply because it looks dirty. Never polish it to make the copper appear brighter, and avoid chemicals marketed as harmless coin cleaners. A cleaned surface can lose its original texture and luster, leaving a coin that looks more brilliant but is actually less desirable to serious collectors. Fingerprints are another danger, particularly on pristine copper-colored surfaces, so the safest handling method is to hold the coin by its edge with clean, dry hands. Long-term storage should use inert, archival-quality holders, flips, or professional gratting holders, while PVC-containing materials should be avoided because they can damage metal surfaces over time. Excess humidity and unstable environmental conditions should also be controlled. If a coin appears unusually fresh, the collector should document it before handling it repeatedly. Photograph both sides, record the weight and diameter, note the mint mark, and keep track of where it came from. For a valuable raw coin, professional certification can provide an independent assessment of authenticity, grade, and color designation. The market also distinguishes between regular circulation strikes and satin finish special strikes, so a collector should not compare their prices as though they were identical products. PCGS lists the Philadelphia satin finish Formative Years cent with a mintage of 784,614 and an auction record of $299 for an SB69 example, a completely different market category from the regular strike pieces. That distinction reinforces the central lesson: price follows identity and scarcity. A coin that looks nearly identical to another may have been manufactured differently, graded differently, or preserved differently. Experienced collectors therefore investigate before they value. They look for original surfaces, uninterrupted luster, strong design detail, appropriate color, clean rims, and evidence that the coin has not been chemically altered. Eye appeal matters too, because two coins at the same numerical grade can still attract very different levels of interest when one has cleaner surfaces and more attractive natural color. When we finally step back from the magnifying glass, the Formative Years cent becomes much more than a modern penny with a picture of Lincoln sitting on a log. It is a deliberately designed piece of American history, issued during the bicentennial of Lincoln's birth and the centennial year of the Lincoln cent, and it captures a stage of his life in which physical labor and self-education existed side by side. The Mint released it as the second of four 2009 reverses, following the Kentucky birth and early childhood design, and preceding the Illinois professional life and Washington presidency designs. Its enormous production figures mean that the average circulated example is not rare, and that fact should remain at the center of any honest valuation. Yet the certified auction record shows that exceptional specimens can occupy a completely different world. The Philadelphia issue has documented sales reaching $1,995 for an MS-67 and $2,363.62 for an MS-68 RD, while the Denver issue has produced certified results of $1,320 for MS-68 RD and $2,040 for MS-69 RD. Those figures do not establish a universal price range, and they certainly do not guarantee that any particular coin is valuable. They simply demonstrate what informed buyers have actually paid for specific authenticated coins under specific circumstances. A lower-grade example, a circulated coin, a damaged piece, or a coin with artificial color belongs to a completely different market. A legitimate doubled die, an important mint error, or a top population certified specimen may attract substantially stronger competition, but only after the feature has been properly identified. That is ultimately why this coin deserves a careful look. The real treasure hunt is not about assuming every 2009 Formative Years cent is rare. It is about learning to recognize the exceptional survivor hidden inside an enormous production run. The young Lincoln on the reverse is reading during a break from splitting logs, and that image captures something remarkably appropriate about collecting itself: patience, observation, and the willingness to look closely at something everyone else might overlook. In the hands of an experienced collector, this little cent becomes a lesson in history, manufacturing, grading, variety attribution, preservation, and market psychology, all contained within 19 millimeters of metal.